Good afternoon. For those of you who I spent time on Zoom with last year, there were some beautiful jars that were rung before we started, and you probably think she's a lot taller in person. All these things are true. So where's my timekeeper at? Okay, I'm going to stop talking at 1:40, which means the goal for our next 25 minutes, there's limits to what can be achieved in 25 minutes, my goal would be that there's one piece of inspiration or reflection that you can use in your own practice. And I think as I thought about, the purpose of this event and the work that we do at Holdsworth, one of the things that we hear and are hearing more and more from district leaders and campus leaders is how undoable our jobs feel. And at the core of well-being is finding some way to approach our jobs in a way that feels sustainable and doable. And so I want to introduce a few ideas that we use at Holdsworth to try to tackle this question. But before we do that, I've found that when we talk about leadership, we're often talking about lots of different things. And so would invite you at your tables, you'll have about 60 to 90 seconds because I only have 25 minutes. To just chat with the person next to you about what does leadership mean to you, and I'm going to ask to hear from a few people. Great. So here's two definitions that I like. So this is Peter Senge. He's one of our very favorite people at the Holdsworth Center. That leadership is the capacity of a human community to shape its future. And then if you don't know Mary Parker Follett, Google her later. She was like a trailblazing management scholar in the 1920s, and basically a lot of men have popularized her work since she died, but really is somebody who had a really compelling vision of leadership, not defined by the exercise of power, but the capacity to increase the sense of power among those led. The most essential work of the leader is to create more leaders. Unsurprisingly, we hear some resonances with what you all shared, but I do think we still have this tendency to think about leadership, one, as the action of an individual person, two, to be really connected with ideas of power and authority, and then three, to push us down visions of being a superhero, of just being able to do all of the things for all of the people all of the time. And this is not a talk on distributed leadership or servant leadership. I think those are important ideas, but they tend to communicate that what we need are different leadership beliefs. And I hear a lot of people-centered leadership beliefs in this room, or that we need different leadership skills. And I actually think there's some more fundamental things going on about the structure of our jobs and how we do them that is producing this superhero tendency and is resulting in this outcome where our jobs feel really undoable. So I think there's two big ideas that we need to think a little bit more about why we sometimes feel like we have to be superheroes, even if our belief is that we are leading with a community of others. And the first is that I think we've defined our jobs too broadly. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then the second is that, and it's related, we failed to really differentiate what leadership looks like in different kinds of roles. And full confession, when we do this work with groups, we usually take 3 whole days and we talk specifically about each of the jobs. And so I'm going to try to do this in now 18 minutes for all of the jobs. Okay, so we'll see how this goes. But these are kind of the two big ideas. Okay. And so I think we're in a situation where our aspiration is this top piece, if I'm going to be a servant leader, I'm going to support and empower my people, and I'm going to distribute leadership throughout the organization because those are my leadership values. But then privately, we still are believing and operating as if I'm personally responsible for every single detail of every single thing that happens in my organization. Great, okay. So we're on a good track so far. And I'm going to go down to the campus level. And I'm going to do this because I think sometimes it's easier for us to see the reality in other people than it is to see it in ourselves. And so we're going to come back up to district leadership, but we're going to focus on the principal. So there's a bunch of research that's been done by the Wallace Foundation and a group called Bain about leadership roles on campuses. And this is from a study in the early 2000s that says that 96% of principals said they're responsible for the performance and growth of all teachers in their buildings, and 82% said that they were the primary person responsible. My question here is that realistic when you have a campus of 30 or 60 or 100 teachers? And my second question is, what are all the other leaders in the school doing? We've got assistant principals, we have people who we call teacher leaders, and what we know about them is only 22% of teacher leaders felt responsible for the performance of teachers they lead, and only 32% felt responsible for the performance of students taught by teachers they lead. And what that says to me is we're not asking teachers to lead anyone in that situation, and we have an overbroad definition of the principal as responsible for every single detail that occurs on the campus, and a lack of empowerment and structured ways of distributing the work of leadership on a campus. Another study, this is from the Wallace Group, basically said I'm not going to read this, if you look at job descriptions for principals and assistant principals, the principal's job description lists basically every single thing that needs to happen on a campus. And then the assistant principal's job description lists the same set of behaviors with the word support in front of all of them. And so I just want us to think about, and then we're going to transition to ourselves, what would look different or feel different about leadership if instead of the principal's job description saying, this is one example, there would be 40 of these bullet points, lead teacher development efforts, and the AP job description says support the principal in teacher development efforts, which does anybody know exactly what that means? What if instead it said the principal's job was to support and coach assistant principals to develop teachers by providing coaching, conducting evaluations, and facilitating professional development, and the assistant principal's job was to lead teacher development efforts for the primary grade? There's a lot more clarity about who's leading what, and I would breathe a bit of a sigh of relief if I was the principal in that situation. And my guess is if we think about the way we think about our jobs, there is an analogy to how we think about our responsibilities. So it's too broad, okay? So the second piece then is how do we get more specific about what leadership looks like in different roles, right? So we're sticking with that definition that leadership comes from many people, and it comes from teams and groups of individuals who are working together to unlock collective purpose, to unlock capacity, to move an organization towards its goals. But we all have different jobs and we have different responsibilities within them. This is the part that's going to be very difficult to try to do for everybody all at once. So we use this framework at Holdsworth called the Leadership Pipeline. And this is a private sector book. I'll include the details at the end. We're currently going through a process to sort of rewrite this thing in an education context. And I'm previewing this way before it's done. But the basic idea is, I think when we think about leadership roles, we think of them like this, a conveyor belt, where basically what's happening is you move into new roles, you do all the same things that you've always been good at, but more of them and at a higher level. And I think that's like our basic idea about leadership. But we actually think leadership roles are more like this, where each time you navigate into a new version of leadership, you need to change the way that you spend your time, you need to change what you value, and you need to evolve and build new skills. And where we run into trouble is when we try to tackle the new responsibilities of the next level with the old mentality, old skills, old values of the previous. Does that make rough sense? Okay. And so there's this whole framework, and we're not going to go into all of it, of all of the leadership levels that likely exist within a school district. But we're going to focus in here because it's the easy one, right? Which is like one of the first big turns that we have in how we demonstrate leadership. And teachers who do not manage other teachers are demonstrating leadership on our campus. But the first time that you move into a role where you're leading a team of other people, it is a major change in your leadership skills, values, and time applications. Everybody in this room has been through that experience. Think back to that job and have a discussion at your table about what those shifts and how you spent your time, what your values were, and the skills that you needed were as you made that transition. About 3 minutes at your table. I'm curious if anybody, if this is true for anybody, and if you would be courageous enough to admit it, where this transition was a hard transition for you in your career. Would anybody admit that? Would somebody be willing to share about like what was challenging about the transition for them in terms of time, value, skills? We've had really good engagement from the back of the room, so would love to hear from somebody up closer. Yeah, as we see too, so we'll go here and then here.
I talked a little bit about having to recover from perfectionism because I had to get to that point where like if somebody else could do something 80% as well as I could do it, I had to let them do it their way and release the part where it wasn't my way, and then figure out sort of like how do I build the skill set to coach, to check in at a time where I'm not letting people go too far outside the guardrails. And it was really hard, and I still work on recovering from perfectionism.
I don't know if there's any Enneagram fans in here, but I'm an Enneagram 1, so that perfectionism stuff really speaks to me.
That's hard to compete with. I'm a 3, so maybe this aligns with my 3 tendencies. But mine was the shift in time, where I think when you move into a role where you're leading others, you're meeting with people more, and you're talking to them more, and you have to listen to them more, and it's hard to take things off to make the time for that. So that like time shift for me was really hard. I still
Yeah, so individual contributors, and we start here because it's one of the most concrete shifts, right? And I think it gets harder as we move up, but there's some patterns, and we'll talk about those. So the big transition here is you probably got promoted to that job because you were really excellent at what you did as an individual contributor. And we don't want you to spend all of your time doing the thing that you were excellent at anymore. And that feels really bad. And what we want you to spend your time on instead is working with other people who may be less good at doing the thing than you. And then you have to have the skills to coach them, and you have to value the work of empowering and setting them up more than you valued before how proud you were of the work that you did individually, right? And so if we think about like general themes, so we have, if you're interested in it, a very detailed list of like all of the shifts by role, but there are some patterns. And the basic patterns is as you're moving up into more senior leadership positions, your work with people and your skills in working with people become increasingly important, an important part of your success. Your communication through layers, through mediums becomes increasingly important. Your ability to plan and drive strategy becomes more important, and you have to value breadth over specialization. And so you have to know a little bit about a lot of things versus getting to be the person who really gets to think deeply about a single thing. In terms of values, that breadth triggers some things for us with our values because it feels like we're losing, the part of ourselves that we've identified with in our careers. We have to value succeeding through others, and we have to value patience over speed. The ability to tolerate that that we're working on kind of months and years time horizons versus days and weeks. And then time has to shift to reflect that. And what happens to a lot of people is if you don't have the skills to do something, it's hard for you to value it because we tend to value the things that we're good at and that make us feel good about who we are and what we can contribute. And so we won't shift our values if we're stuck on skills. And then if we don't value things and don't have the skills, we won't spend time on it. And so we have a tendency to keep spending our time doing the things that we're good at and that we have valued. And so one other final idea, which I think is really important and is a big challenge for schools and districts right now, is like the other big idea, and what I think is so powerful about this framework is if you get everybody operating at the right level, the folks at the highest level have to be thinking longest term, and the folks at the lowest level have to be solving the most immediate pressing challenges. And we know we're in trouble when we're not able to distribute ourselves across all this work. And the main thing that happens is everybody's getting sucked down into the immediate. And there's obviously periods, crises are one of them, right? So think COVID. It was the right thing to do for everyone to be in those details. But if that's where we're operating all of the time, we're not accomplishing all of the work of the organization, right? And so, as a quick rule of thumb, enterprise leaders are thinking closer to a 5 or 7 year time horizon. Leaders of self are thinking on a daily or weekly time horizon, and you need to have all of the spans in between. And if our jobs aren't structured to allow people to do that, the organization will get stuck and fall behind, and we'll feel like our jobs are undoable. And so, a classic example of what happens is people are operating at lower levels than they really should be, and that's what results in organizations struggling to kind of get where they need to be, people feeling like their jobs are undoable, because what's going to keep happening is everybody's going to get sucked down because the most immediate work has to get done. And then that's how superintendents feel like their jobs are really, really, really hard. So what can we do about this in 3 minutes? Okay, so this is like the reflection exercise. So there's a lot more reading that you can do. You can get a lot more detailed in kind of defining what these shifts are. But a basic rule of thumb that I would encourage everyone to think about, and maybe this is already a part of your practice, what are the things that only I, in the role that I have in this organization, can do to allow the organization to succeed? Are we clear on that? And obviously, if we're not clear, we can talk to managers, we can talk to high-performing peers, and we can really make sure that we're clear on what those most pressing priorities are. And then we have to ask ourselves, am I succeeding and making progress in those most important critical areas? Not necessarily all of the other things that I'm good at and enjoy doing, but in those most critical areas. And then if not, look at my calendar. Does my time allocation reflect that those are my most important priorities? This is is part of why I'm not spending my time there because I'm not sure if I have the skill to do it. And I'm doing kind of a professional version of procrastination to avoid that thing. Do I feel motivated and excited to do this work? That's a values question. And if not, how do I get myself motivated and excited to do this work? And then what do I need to let go of in order to do the work that only I can do, and how do I do that, right? Which is going to get you into questions of how do you empower your team and how do you distribute the work. So these are the questions, no matter whether you're the superintendent, you're at the cabinet level, another senior leadership role, that I think can help you start thinking about whether you've made that shift and are kind of operating at the right elevation. And would love to continue the conversation with you. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. And then always want to leave a couple of, I'm a big book person, so this is the text that I referenced that we're kind of building off of and playing with, the leadership pipeline. It won't all feel relevant in a district context, but there are some pieces that are really concrete. And then for superintendents, I found this book. It talks about 6 mindsets of enterprise leaders to be really, really helpful in reflecting on that question of what are the most important things that I can do. So thank you very much for letting me join you. Hope you have a wonderful couple of days.